HUD has canceled, I see a report of half of the 162 active grants going to nonprofits handling fair housing complaints.
It pulled up a great chart showing how much loan funding they had, which was between $100 and $150 million funded in 2019, up through about $1.5 billion in 2024.
Episode 34 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, we have been chomping at the bit all week to talk about this big Redfin and Rocket Mortgage news. And just finding the time to get this done every week. We always can't meet as fast as we want to, but that sent a lot of shockwaves, maybe not necessarily in the appraisal community, but in the real estate community at large.
Yeah, I've listened to a couple of people in the real estate space and mortgage space in particular, reacting or responding to that. And a big move, I think, by a big player in there looking to, further gain market share. One analysis I heard was, kind of comparing egos between the Rocket space and the United Wholesale Mortgage space, or just owners of those companies, making big moves. And, interesting to see. I think bigger moves than you and I are making in the moment, but it'd been a lot of fun to think about, like what the implications might be there.
Yeah, certainly one part of the story is the attempt by Rocket to kind of fully build the vertical stack of the home buying experience. They've got the application that's kind of a personal finance application that's kind of trying to connect with buyers early in the process, before they are considering buying a home. I think those were the Super Bowl ads were advertising that interaction. We talked to Brian View recently of FinLocker, who's doing kind of a similar thing, just trying to help mortgage officers, mortgage brokers, loan officers meet the home buyer before they're there, or help them get ready. And so if you're doing that, you also probably want to connect with folks that are looking for homes or actively finding one and seeing them all the way through the loan closing process. So this is an exciting swing at the full vertical stack, maybe in a way that doesn't really exist well right now. But there's another side to this, which from personal experience, I keep looking at. It's kind of the Redfin side. $10 billion market cap in the middle of COVID, in selling for $1.75 billion. And the CEO will always be thought fondly of me, or by me, in one of his earning calls late last year. Had asked, well, what are you going to do if rates don't go down? And it was hunker down in the foxhole, drink our own urine, or our enemy's blood, I think was it. And, rates didn't go down. I'll tell you. And here we have this deal here. So, I think probably not the end that Redfin saw, although a wonderful landing spot and certainly a really exciting pathway in front of both them and Rocket.
Yeah, well, and as these things do, that 1.75 billion price was a significant premium over just its closing stock price prior to that. And initially the headline of some company selling for $1 billion sounds like an exciting thing, and I'm sure it probably was at some level, but it was a tenth of what its price was, as you had stated, in early on in the middle of COVID. And so I think reflective of what a lot of companies in the real estate space are dealing with. And you shared that quote from the CEO, and I wish it didn't resonate as much as it was. And though it's graphic, it's pretty depictive, I think, of what it's been to try to survive the downswing, where even Fed's lowering their interest rates hasn't had a material impact on the mortgage rate. And so people are just having to survive. And it's not a lot of fun, but you talk to those that have been through a cycle or two, and their perspective's a lot different than those that haven't and are afraid that the sky is falling. And at least the CEO felt like he had the perspective that we'll survive one way or the other, even if it's ugly and far from pretty.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, watching the lending community react to this, and realtors too, this is deeply unsettling given the magnitude of the move here and what it could mean down the road. I think I don't remember who it was, CEO of some mortgage company, that said, "Hey, everybody's asking me what I think of this deal," and like, well, I really haven't thought much about it. I mean, I'm trying to build my own business here, and I think that's probably what we all should do, other than just sort of staying informed and take ideas where we can of where the market is moving. But it's so it doesn't impact the appraiser space, I don't think, as much right now. But Jeff, we've hopefully some fun, and I'll try and share this well. We'll see if the podcasting app lets us do it. But a funny from someone that is trying to take a full vertical stack approach to the home buying experience. We had a chuckle at this TikTok advertisement from Rocket. Let me see if I can give it a go.
The only thing worse than having an appraiser come to your house is preparing your home to be appraised, but not anymore, because getting a home equity loan could have just become easier thanks to this automated valuation system from Rocket Mortgage. With this tool, you could save time and money on appraisal fees, and you don't have to stress about having an appraiser drive out to your house. You could get your home's valuation in just a few seconds, which could get you the money that you need in as little as 1 week. If you're curious to see if you could take advantage of this tool, tap the link to get started today.
Jeff, I get a chuckle out of it. Really, the first 5 or 10 seconds, that the only thing worse, there's only one thing worse in the world than having an appraiser come to your house, is actually getting ready for him to come over. I think we laugh a lot about it, and a lot of humor is based in reality, right? This is sort of the environment that appraisers are working through right now. Is everyone is trying to come up with ways that an appraisal isn't needed.
Yeah, the only thing worse, I mean, like the worst possible experience you could have is having an appraiser there in the first place. And the only thing worse is thinking about the dread of the appraiser coming. I mean, it maybe gives some insight into Rocket's perspective of appraisers. If you want to take a cynical view, I think the more realistic or practical view is that they're marketing home equity lines of credit, which don't always require an appraisal, or at least an in-person appraisal anyway. There are alternative valuation models that they use, or valuation products that they use anyway. So, I mean, this isn't necessarily a massive pivot. It's a marketing piece, to be sure. But, we did get a laugh at the appraiser being the worst possible thing anybody could conceive of, either having there in person or have to worry about preparing for them coming. And you and I have both been through a whole lot of homes, Mark, and I can attest that a lot of people don't give a second thought to the appraiser showing up until you are there. And then they're saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry that my kid's in the shower and that my kid's asleep in the bedroom, and we don't want you going in half of the house because we forgot you were coming or didn't really care that you were coming in the first place." So I don't know how well they're going to strike a chord with their potential clients as to that, solving their biggest pain point in life. But it was funny all the same, and a little insightful at the same time, I think.
You bet. Well, Jeff, I mean, there is so much governmental news coming out every which way, and you feel like you got to follow it on some level, because it's having pretty meaningful impacts through the appraisal space. Because I think government, first, we're a highly regulated space, appraisal, mortgage, et cetera, and we have felt a lot of increased scrutiny or regulation within the appraisal community over the last 6-7 years. And a lot of that is sort of changing just on a dime. And we're seeing a lot of that. So curious as your thoughts, a couple of things that we have seen. HUD has canceled, I see a report of half of the 162 active grants going to nonprofits handling fair housing complaints. That's a big deal, it seems like.
Wait, you said that there are 162 different grants to different nonprofit organizations? Like, that's way different than what I had assumed until we had heard this. Honestly, I had thought that when a fair housing complaint was filed, it was HUD that opened the investigation and did the investigation, that they've got 162 nonprofit organizations that are combining to, investigate all of these was a little bit mind-blowing, to be honest with you. having seen how some of those have gone, it feels a little bit more like a hostage negotiation than it does an investigation into a good faith complaint. Essentially, at least what I've seen anecdotally is, they'll say, hey, why don't we just offer to settle this so we can move on? Appraiser, we're going to extort you for some money, and then we'll say that we did something good. I mean, of course, they don't use that language. That's what it feels like when you're on the, the appraiser side, trying to have done, the right thing and the best job that you can. But that was mind blowing, Mark, that they had that many different contracts with that many different organizations out there.
The article estimates that nonprofits handle 75% of the roughly 34,000 fair housing complaints in 2023. Yeah, Jeff, it is really surprising, kind of the inner workings of HUD in pursuing these sorts of things. I just didn't know, and I think this is, any change in the process is an opportunity for sort of headline news and then me to learn a little bit about it. So I'm seeing a lot of that these days as processes in place are being looked at, audited, and deciding if they want to continue them forward.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't mean to come across as too cynical because, where there may be situations of legitimate, housing discrimination, of course, that should be addressed. I think the challenge or the frustration that, a lot of appraisers and I think others in the real estate space have dealt with is when, there's some accusation levied that isn't, well-founded or founded at all. And then you're finding yourself, trying to defend yourself and having to go through the consternation of a complaint and an investigation, and you don't know what the expectation is, and then they're coming in saying, give us money and we'll settle, and it just, that part gets frustrating. But of course, you don't want people being taken advantage of, or fair housing principles not being applied. But it sure feels like with 168 policing organizations out there, there's the incentive to overstate what's actually happening in the problem. So to the extent that there's less funding to go after non-issues, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, and to be clear and to make sure that we are specifically accurate, it was like 162 grants. If you assume that each nonprofit gets a single grant, then it would be 162. It could, maybe these grants are piled up and some get more, and each grant was worth basically $425,000 for the year. So that was kind of what's out there, and it apparently on some meaningful scale has come to a pause, if not an end.
That makes sense, and I appreciate the clarification. I was assuming that each grant was for a specific organization, and that probably isn't accurate, but worth clarifying for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is what the article, and watching how HUD is reacting and what they're doing with all that is a microcosm of at large what government is having to work through. Jeff, we've a number of different things are going on here that affect appraisal for sure. Some that we've been directly involved in and excited to be part of them for a long time and hope to be part of them for a long time forward. But we saw a change within Fannie Mae, Appraisal Institute, Urban League that have this wonderful program, the Appraisal Diversity Initiative, seeking to bring new folks into the industry, has renamed or rebranded the program to the Appraiser Development Initiative, same ADI acronym that it's been going through. And Jeff, this is in the context of, I think it's Scott Turner, who is the director here at HUD, that said, it was quoted in this Working Real Estate article. Once again, let me be clear, DEI is dead at HUD. Well, this is the sort of context with which we've got that we know folks are trying to operate within and keep programs running that are really helpful to the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting context and background. And I mean, just a night and day difference between the administrations and then the carry on and kind of downstream effects, that we're seeing, as you said, Mark, between, what had been and what is currently. Honestly, I don't think that much changes with the ADI program. And frankly, as I've thought a little bit about it, I think an Appraiser Development Initiative that is seeking to spread awareness of the appraisal profession, provide opportunities for education and including experience through the PREA program in some cases. is not a bad thing. I think that to the extent that you have people aware of professions that are good opportunities for careers out there and wanting to come in because they're interested in and passionate about it, not just because it was an option that was afforded because of a family member or something, is probably a better way forward. But this statement that you referenced, that that quote from the HUD secretary, is just a stark difference, and we're seeing this impact that anything related to DEI, at least from the current administration, it has been turned on its head from what it was in the previous administration. And locally, I saw a scenario where the state of Utah had applied for some grant funding to help support appraiser experience through Perea, that got declined because of like DEI type of related language. And that wasn't even so much diversity as it was focusing on rural versus like non-rural type of markets to bring appraisers into. And the grant was denied on that basis. Now they're able to reapply and kind of broaden the scope to fit the administration's perspective and agenda. And I think that's what I'm seeing here is, frankly, the scope is probably just being broadened to something that is probably better aligned with the long-term outlook of the profession anyway. So interesting times to see, for sure.
You bet. We are here to react to them, and so many folks, and I think it's the proper way to say, hey, leave politics to politics and focus on things that you can control. But boy, has it been true over the last just 2 months? It feels like 20 years, but so much change is happening. It feels like at least appropriate to stay abreast of what's happening. And that kind of takes me to economic news and things that are happening around the country, Jeff. We've got these a lot of layoffs around government. I think it was HUD that's laying off a number of people. Certainly these nonprofits that we were just talking about that are no longer receiving grants have that sort of analysis to contemplate. Just kind of interesting that a loan officer fellow that I follow on social media, I think it's John Downs, is a loan officer in DC, and just kind of interesting to see what's happening as we might have a lot of change happening there. That quoting that realtors are quite surprised that there's 15 offers on a house that just went up for sale, and that the offers are over contract and would appear to be as healthy as possible. And his response was, and I think coming from a perspective of kind of seeing the actual mortgage applications on the backside of that, or that people are very quickly often getting private sector job offers that are even more lucrative than what were in the public sector. And we've heard, and we covered last week, Scott Besson that was talking about that's the attempt. That's what they're hoping to see, is to kind of privatize a lot of these well-skilled folks and move that way. Won't be an easy transition, but kind of interesting that there's some anecdote in the kind of ground zero of this sort of stuff happening, that these folks are finding landing spots to some degree.
Yeah, I think that's right, Mark. And one of the points that was brought up was that those that elected to have their employment like bought out or paid to leave, with that initial offer that Doge had brought out, they've got money in their pockets and the opportunity to go take a new job. And so it would stand to reason that if the job is also in the DC area, that they're probably better positioned to go buy a home than they would have been. Now, longer term, how that plays out with maybe, some more forced, layoffs or just reductions in funding, that could certainly change. I wouldn't be surprised if it did, but it's not the immediate effect that I think a lot of people were assuming, that the market was going to crash there.
Yeah, you bet. And I think so. This sort of stuff, there's just so many currents that are working with one another or some against, and what ends up winning the day. We saw reports over the last 5, 6, 7 days that United Airlines, American Airlines quoting a lot less traffic somehow, and they probably would know, but citing government travel way down. That is in as much as a 50% drop in government travel, as these expenses are starting to be watched one way or another. So, I was just at a beach a few days ago during spring break, and it is about as quiet as I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, really. I mean, I guess COVID a little bit quieter than what I saw yesterday, but just notable, and it does feel to me as I'm moving around the country that it's quiet.
I'm seeing the same thing, Mark, and it's hard to put too much, I think, stock in anecdotes. But my wife managed to find like the cheapest possible airline tickets that we could on a discount carrier to go visit a sister for kind of spring break too, and exact same thing that we saw. The flight was less than half full. Airport, coming in and out was less busy than typical for sure. Of course, we didn't even pay to have carry on, so it was literally just carrying like a personal item and stuff. But but interesting to see, and I am at a broader sense though seeing from some earning reports, both from major airlines as well as major retailers. The Wall Street Journal's been documenting some earnings reports and guidance from the likes of Walmart, and then some convenience stores owners and operators that are saying, hey, we're planning on having lower gross revenues going forward based on what they're observing with the strength of the consumer. And I think as you were just talking about the different currents in the economy, it's hard to try to think that we have a finger on the pulse of everything and what is ultimately going to lead to. But there are definitely these currents of a pullback in spending, and that's starting to show up even in some of the inflation data with the recent prints.
Yeah, I think that leads us into the inflation print this last week, and I think there was January was at 3%. The expectation was 2.9%, and it came in at 2.8. I think the price of oil, the price of certain commodities or household goods have come down a little bit here. I think everybody's holding their breath, and maybe on some level, some expected slowdown before the real inflation takes hold. As soon as we get some real tariffs implemented, I think it is April 1st that a reciprocal tariff, any tariff that a country is charging us, we will begin to charge them, and some of those are gigantic. And I think I read that we collect something like $57 billion. Am I right in this? I think I am right. $57 billion in tariffs, and the increase in tariffs will be increasing to some 500 billion, so a 10x increase in tariffs one way or another, or an income here, but certainly have an impact, whether that's passed on to the consumer, the manufacturer, et cetera. So things are getting better. I'm excited to see that, and there's more to come.
Boy, there is, and I think it's a good point that you make on the tariffs. I mean, that could have the opposite effect on inflation prints and data. It'll be interesting to see. There are lots of articles of very specifics, coming out with, kind of reciprocal, but, in the sense of the U.S. threatening something. And so then, Canada or the EU responds in kind, and it kind of escalates a little bit. And none of that is reflected in a February, inflation print or whatever. So, we'll continue to watch and monitor what impact these may have. The tariffs aren't really showing up in the most recent inflation prints, but I suspect we'll move the needle. It's just a matter of when and how much, unless there are other compensating factors, with government cuts in expenses and, and that sort of a thing. But if there's so many threads to pull at, it's hard to know what the net effect will ultimately be.
Amen. Well, in other news, we had Bill Pulte get confirmed as FHFA director. So that's interesting to see. And along the lines of you and I's prediction there, I'm not sure it was very bold, but there we are.
Yeah, I think that the expectation was there was a pretty good chance of it happening. So us jumping on and saying, yeah, we think so too, probably it doesn't deserve a whole lot of praise, but it is helpful to at least get the cabinet members in place and to understand, what the likely policies and perspective is going to be, going forward. And so just recently confirmed there, and we'll be watching to see if there are any, major changes. But I think expectations of, preparation for, privatization of the Fannie and Freddie is, reasonably expected at this point, probably not in the near term. And we'll see how it plays out. I do remember, and I've been kind of curiously watching, Ed Pinto's perspective when we talked with him a little while back, was that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of talk about it. There's going to be a desire to do it, but will there actually be the ability in terms of, capitalization and mechanically the ability to do it? And I think right now the consensus generally is that, yeah, it's going to happen in a couple-year time period. we'll see if if it actually does or not. There are reasons that it can, and potentially a few that it may not.
You bet. You bet. Well, congratulations to Bill. I think we looked at the Fannie Mae price that I think was hovering between 5 and 6 as of this writing here.
Yeah, that's right. It was right around $6 a share, which was up from its couple 10-year prior average of $1 to $2. I think we had referenced Bill Ackman talking about it being a good buy and expecting that for it to go up 3 or 4 times from where it is now, maybe more than that even. It's kind of hovered there, and I haven't really seen it move at least in the last couple of days with the Bill Pulte appointment. So I don't know if the market's just not expecting that to change the likelihood of its trajectory at this point or not. But it's been hovering there, and Freddie's same thing, I believe.
You bet. You bet. Well, Jeff, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but I certainly see those real estate transactions are thawed out to some degree. They were kind of inexplicably frozen for quite a while, and I see a lot going around the web that folks that aren't deep in the actual nuts and bolts of the mortgage space are coming to learn about forbearance and a lot of the foreclosures that have not taken place. And it's being, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but kind of being framed as the government taking over several $1 million of mortgage payments for folks. And I'm not sure that's exactly right, but there is kind of a realization or awareness of this thing that you and I have talked about here, which is that appraisers have relied on that kind of work, the distress work in downtimes that just hasn't been here for us.
It really hasn't. And I've seen just very limited handfuls of experiences where there's a short sale, transaction, that needs an appraisal done or something, but not in any meaningful volume. And that's why I think you're right. I think it's a combination of these, this forbearance and maybe borne out by a change in administration's perspective on, that aspect of it as well. If there is a change, we're not seeing it, carry out yet, but there may be some kind of some shadow inventory or some pent up assets in terms of housing that's distressed, but hasn't had an incentive or an ability to move yet. Maybe that part unthaws as well, which would help address some of the limited inventories that we're seeing. Yeah, maybe it won't for a while, but it's something to watch because that could also be another shoe to drop here before too long.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it, Jeff? Death, divorce, and debt are the 3 Ds that get mortgage transactions to take place one way or another. And those things have already historically always been around there, and we just haven't seen a ton of it over the last several years. So interesting to watch things play out.
Boy, it is. Yep.
Yeah. So Jeff, I don't know if you've got any other topics to talk about here, but just watching the artificial intelligence space, I'm watching that closely. I think you are each week, and a notable, and I don't know really what to take of it. I don't know if it's more rumor or not, but saw that Microsoft was just reviewing their Copilot language model use. They have scaled back a little bit some of their data center leasing plans one way or another. I don't know what any of this stuff means. I think some would interpret it as, maybe seeing a ceiling on what, max compute can get you one way or another. But when they have Copilot, I've not used a lot of. I've heard some folks talking about it that sort of a bit mixed results. But it makes me worried when they have invested a lot in something and then they're looking at their options no more than 12 months in. What do the little guys do when you commit to a process and then have to change course?
It can be really disruptive. And I think that they've gone after a lot of the business community and applications on their, Office suite of products and stuff, Copilot built into that. I've used it some and find that I need to use it and everything else a lot more to really be, as conversant with the nuanced differences as what I know some of the power users of AI to be. I think it's decent at like some data analytic type stuff. I haven't found it nearly as good at finding real-time answers of what's going on, out there on the internet, currently, and that sort of a thing. I do wonder if it's a specific business decision on their part that's a function of a trend that's going on, or if it's, a realization that others are soon to come to. I will say that on another front, I've been forcing myself to use Grok more often and more frequently, and find it to be really good at finding, current, topical information, whether it's, Bill Pulte being confirmed or whatever else. It will find accurate information. It will then also give you links to websites and X posts, about the topic that you're looking at. And, for a research assistant, I'm finding that to be, very, very useful.
Boy, I was just reviewing, getting ready for this pod, just the differences between Zillow and Redfin as Rocket is acquiring Redfin. On in some articles, I've seen reference that, hey, Zillow is trying to vertical stack themselves here with the acquisition of, or the implementation of a mortgage arm, and that Rocket is following that up. And it's well, what is the difference between Redfin and Zillow? And what a wonderful 7 category, 3 bullet point per category topic from a 1-line question that I ask it. What is the difference between these two? And it's covering things like, all Redfin is employed agents. They're seeking a discount commission, 1 to 1.5%, where Zillow is, these are obvious, I guess, once you read them, but some of the nuance is just not top of mind. But Zillow is really just that advertising and lead platform. You're still going to get the 5 to 6% commissions because you're just being connected to a more traditional agent. And it walked through a number of, the real-time nature of the data and the values there, thinking that Redfin was more timely, and so on. So it's just one example that I've found, and it really, really useful.
Yeah, as we were talking about that, I asked it about Zillow Mortgage Arm's loan volume, over time, and it pulled up a great chart showing how much loan funding they had, which was between $100 and $150 million funded in 2019, up through about $1.5 billion in 2024. And the thing that was cool about it, that, 2 things that stood out. One, just the massive rate of growth for Zillow mortgage, as far as how much they're funding. Now, in the grand scheme of what some of the biggest players are funding, I don't think it's all that big yet, but it's a very rapid rate of increase. But in terms of the AI, it was really interesting that Grok, pulls that out and then says, would you like me to look deeper? I don't, I kind of hear almost like a confidence score in the data that it was providing, and said, I could go in and read through their earnings call reports and get more like granular and specific data. It's just really cool that it's saying, here's what I've got so far with a cursory look. Do you want me to dig deeper? Here's how I would dig deeper if I did. Just really cool to see how the interaction and the interface with the artificial intelligence is evolving, kind of real time as we start to get a better sense of what it does and how it does it.
You bet. Well, these, it's interesting. It is complicated, if nothing else, to run a business effectively in this day and age, because so much is changing, and you make a decision based on today's set of data. It most certainly is going to be different tomorrow. So I think you've got to make decisions that allow for flexibility and nimbleness.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm seeing it, companies that are trying to leverage multiple artificial intelligence platforms, and in part for that reason, that they want to be robust and kind of protected against a change or someone pulling out or whatever. So tons to monitor, but it's fun to do it.
Well, Jeff, a little bit shorter episode today. We really greatly appreciate the viewership and the comments. They mean more than in our little project here, and encouragement to keep going forward. So looking for anything from the podcast, please do let us know. Happy to cover some topics that are of interest to those that are listening, in formatting, comments, whatever types of shows that are more interesting. Happy to do them.
Yeah, for sure. Welcome any feedback, and shout out to Tim and Jason, who have reached out in multiple situations or occasions, just with positive, feedback generally. So really do appreciate that for sure. And we're continuing to challenge ourselves to find relevant and interesting topics to be discussing. And so, Mark, we're raising the bar. Whether we can clear it or not, I don't know, but we'll either clear it or trip over it trying. Well, one of the two.
Sounds like a plan to me. Till next time.
Very good. Thank you.